going to go on and jump into the story. As I have said in past readings, I did not come up with the titles for these stories because I don't ever put titles on my stories, but the editor did. They're a little odd sometimes, but let's just go with it. This one is called Thanks But No Thanks. This is a story about a family of screech owls. If we were asked, most of us would say that we have a favorite animal or at least a favorite species. Some of us favor raccoons, some armadillos, some prefer eagles or feel a certain fondness for monkeys. It's often the case that the animals we feel most connected to are animals who we have read about or have had the opportunity to see or even care for. Perhaps this is why dogs and cats are often the first creatures we think of when we hear the word animal. Wildlife Rescue has, through our many years, done its best to care for an incredibly wide range of wild animals. It has usually been easy to tell their stories and to evoke sympathy and understanding for these wonderful creatures. For the most part, all of us have seen a raccoon, a possum, or a skunk. We've watched mockingbirds and cardinals flitting about in the trees in our yards or in city parks. It seems that the human experience is one that encourages us to feel for what and who we know or are familiar with. But there is an entire population of silent, night-dwelling birds whom few of us have the privilege to ever see, much less really get to know. There was, however, a couple in Marion, Texas, who did have the unique opportunity to not only observe, but actually save an entire family of these seldom seen little birds. As you know, spring is the time when all manner of accidents happen to wildlife. While they are doing their best to have and raise their babies, we are doing our best to trim trees, clean out storage sheds and garages, and mow overgrown fields. In these activities, we inadvertently upset and threaten their very lives. The spring of 1980 was no exception to these traditional human practices. There was a majestic old oak tree living next to a farmhouse just outside the town of Marion. For countless years, this tree had been home to squirrels, mockingbirds, caterpillars, and lizards. This tree also offered a particularly nice, safe hollow for one other animal as well. It was in this particular spring that a pair of screech owls decided to choose this old oak as their home. In no time, they had cleaned out the hollow and set about the task of settling in and laying their eggs. The elderly couple living in the farmhouse was not even aware of the owl's family presence. Every night, the parent birds would fly from the hollow and disappear into the black night. All of their time was spent hunting food for their babies. On occasion, one of the small slate gray birds would take advantage of a single bright yard light shining over the oak tree, attracting juicy nighttime insects. For weeks, all went well for the owl family. Their nestling owlets grew, and in no time were feisty little fledglings who were ready to fly. It was not until an early morning thunderstorm hit the area with high winds and torrential rains that the owl's life took a turn for the worse. Thunderstorms are a welcome sight during a warm spring. The problem with this one was that it hit during the same pre-dawn hours that the owl family was teaching their now fledgling youngsters to fly. One by one, the little owls emerged from the hollow. One by one, they fluttered to the ground, and as they sat, the cooling rain drenched their small feathered bodies. There was nothing Mom and Dad Owl could do. They could not retrieve their threatened young. They could only fly to their side or call to them from the safety of the tree, hoping that somehow they would find their way back to the nest. But the baby birds could not fly to safety. They could only sit and wait in the pouring rain. By the time the sun rose, the young owl's feathers were saturated. The three of them sat shivering and frightened. Their parents had fallen silent. Their overnight vigil had done nothing to save their babies. And now that the sun had risen and there were people walking about, they knew it was not safe. They dared not fly to the ground. All they could do was watch silently from the top of the old live oak tree. It was not until the elderly couple walked outside to assess storm damage that the baby owls were discovered. It was difficult to believe that the 3 wet lumps of gray feathers were actually living, breathing beings. The owl parents watched helplessly from the tree as their offspring were gently picked up, dried off, and placed in a large cardboard box. They watched in silence as their babies disappeared into the old farmhouse, carried away from their sight, carried away with no chance for them to ever reclaim or care for their young again. 2 hours passed before a volunteer from Wildlife Rescue arrived. She had come to pick up the orphans. Because no one had ever seen the parent screech owls, because no one knew that there was a nest in the hollow of the old tree, it was wrongly assumed that the babies had been somehow caught up in the storm and transported to the spot where they were found. The couple looked everywhere for a nest. The volunteers searched the area hoping to discover some trace of parent birds so that the fledglings could be reunited to their family. But no human eye could observe the hollow on the opposite side of the majestic oak. It was well concealed. No human eye could see the 2 sad gray figures sitting quietly watching as their family vanished into a waiting vehicle. To a mother and father screech owl, their babies were not being rescued, they were being stolen. The fact that well-meaning people were stealing them made no difference to them. All they knew was that their 3 cherished young were soon to be gone forever, and it seemed that all they could do was sit and watch. We will never know if it was the father or the mother owl who called out, and it hardly matters. But just as the volunteer's car pulled out of the yard and headed down the drive, the elderly woman could not help but hear the loud, plaintive hooting of a hopeful parent owl calling one last time to her young. The calls could not be mistaken, and they certainly could not be ignored. They were loud and they were distinct. They were the calls of a bird who could do little else but would not sit silently by to watch her babies disappear. The volunteer saw the elderly couple waving frantically, turned the car around, and raced the owls back to the yard. Now all eyes were focused on the old oak, and in only minutes, where before there had been just dense green foliage, suddenly there appeared the perfect silhouette of 2 adult screech owls. Only one challenge remained: how to get the babies and the parents reunited. In only minutes, a 12-foot ladder, some baling wire, some fresh green alfalfa were all gathered together to create a perfect makeshift owl nest. The baling wire would serve as a handle, the alfalfa would be the nest material, and a cardboard box became the tree hollow. 12 feet up into the tree was a perfect strong limb, and there the new nest was hung in place. The almost orphaned babies were gently tucked inside on top of the soft, clean alfalfa. It was time for the humans to step back and watch as nature did her work. From deep inside the cardboard box could be heard the high-pitched hoots of the baby owls. The parent owls wasted no time in flying to their side, first one adult, then the other. Landing on the cardboard nest was not easy. It felt foreign to the parent owls, but strange or not, these 2 were not about to take any chances. They had their babies back, and in only several minutes, both the mother and the father owl had made their way into the new cardboard box nest. In the coming weeks, the perfect ending to a near tragedy would unfold. As the baby owls grew, they had little need for the simulated nest. In only days, they were up and perching on the side of the box. From there, they once again fluttered to the ground, but this time there was no storm, and they were strong enough to make their way into low-lying shrubs and trees. At one point, one youngster was seen back in the tree hollow with one of his parents, and in no time the 3 were flying about, perching in the uppermost canopy of that grand old oak. Because there were people who cared, but most of all because there were people who paid attention to nature, the owl family was able to get the help they needed and go on living their life as one of the most amazing residents of the majestic old oak. So I try when I write these stories first of all, they're all true stories, so that part's easy to tell the stories. But I also try to focus on mostly happy endings. Needless to say, of course, we do see a lot of tragedies in the work of rehabilitation of wildlife and providing sanctuary for wildlife. And I do talk about some tragedies in the books that I've written, but the fact of the matter is that there are a lot of happy endings. And there are a lot of happy endings, again, because people care. There's a lot of happy endings because those of you who are with us today care enough to donate, care enough to be dedicated to our mission, care enough to find out what we're doing, find out ways to help, to volunteer, to donate items, to donate money, all the things that all of you do. So do let me know, do you have any questions about this story or comments or anything you would like to say today? You know, I do have enough stories. It's a matter of, you probably remember this, the story of the first book. I always say to people, I never actually wrote a book. I wrote a bunch of stories and fortunately had an editor who put them into a manuscript. But yeah, I do have enough new stories, and I definitely have been thinking about it, and I'm pretty much ready to do another book. Absolutely. All the newsletter stories are in books, with the exceptions of the ones that I've been writing over the past probably couple of years now. One loses track of how much time passes, and I write newsletters often enough to where there are quite a number that aren't in books now. This last book was written in, 03 maybe? I don't even remember. The first one was written, I think, in 99. And then I did this one in 03 or 04, somewhere in there. So yes, a great many of the newsletter stories are definitely in the 2 books. There are a great many more newsletter stories that need to go into the 3rd book. Okay, so I think what they had in mind was, and I agree with you, the titles are weird. I absolutely agree with you. I think it was that, okay, thank you, but no, our babies aren't really orphaned, we'll take them back now. Yeah, see, that's it. That's something that our species is not very good at, I'm afraid. We tend not to trust nature. First of all, that's what I've seen in our years doing wildlife rescue, is we think we know better. We think we always know better. And I've had to learn over the years that when what I'm compelled to do first, to perhaps think I'm helping some wild animal, I need to just stop and say, wait a minute. Because for those of us who love animals, it's a very natural thing to want to help them. And that's great, and that's wonderful as long as it's kept in check. And it's not kept in check often enough, and so we do more damage. Always well intended, but still, damage is damage. So yeah, we have to be careful. We have to remember that nature has been out there doing what she does for a long time, a lot longer than we've been around. And more times than not, we really are not needed. And I think that that's an important lesson for all of us to always remember. I know I have to admit, there have been times when I've been driving somewhere and I'll see a fawn out in the pasture somewhere just standing there and think, oh my God, is his mother around? Which is just a knee-jerk thing. And of course I know better and I would never do anything, but that is the knee-jerk reaction. Is he okay? Is he okay? Is he okay? They're okay. They're fine. They live in the world that they've lived in, that we don't live in, and that they do fine in without our help, except obviously when they're injured or sick. Then of course it's a different story. That is probably the most challenging part of wildlife rehabilitation. The most challenging part, because they do, you're right, they have got to know how to hunt. So what we do for predators who we rescue, fortunately, we have the 212-acre sanctuary. And so we are able to keep them in a part of the sanctuary, any of the animals who are going to be released, certainly, but certainly with predators, we're able to keep them in a part of the sanctuary where very little contact with us. They don't, and we do that early on. We also, another piece that's important to kind of going back before the teaching them to hunt piece is that keeping them with their own kind is very important. Because if they start relating to us too much from an early age, that's deadly. because that becomes, they are habituated then to humans. So let's just use bobcats as an example, because we take in so many bobcat kittens these days. Good and bad is when you get in more than one. So unfortunately, you've got two who are orphaned, but good that they've got each other. So keeping them somewhere isolated from people, letting them be with each other, keeping them in a natural setting, part of the sanctuary where there's not much human activity. Then the really tricky part comes, because we're an animal protection organization, but we have to feed them other animals. And there's no way around that. If you're going to ensure their survival in the wild, there's no way around that. So generally speaking, the way we do it, I won't go into a lot of detail, though if you want me to, I can. Of course, we have large enclosures, and we set free in those large enclosures mice. So it's not that they, the mice have a chance to get away, which is what happens in nature as well. And if the mice do get away, the mice keep going and, are glad of it. But that also tells us that animal's not ready to be set free, because he can't hunt. He can't successfully hunt yet. He might know that he wants that mouse, but he doesn't know how to go about catching and killing. The other piece that's difficult with predators in rehab, if they come to us and they've been in captivity for a while, they're not identifying that mouse as food. I mean, the first bobcat who I rescued way back when, and she wasn't releasable, of course, but I still wanted her to be on a more natural diet. She didn't know what meat was, because she'd not been given any. I mean, it's just, there's so many complexities. Predators are so complex, and how they're made up, how nature makes them up. It's just really difficult. But that's, in a nutshell, that's what we have to do. We have to keep them somewhere in the sanctuary grounds that are spacious, as we keep everyone, of course, that are isolated from our contact, and they have to be able to catch mice who are set free. And once they're able to do that repeatedly and able to kill very quickly, that's the other piece of it. Again, an unpleasantness, but there it is. I wish there were only one. I mean, again, pests, so-called. Snakes, bats, cockroaches,
right,
skunks. I mean, go on and on and on and on. Possums, because they have the naked tail. Rats, mice, because they have naked tails. They look creepy. Whatever it is that people see in them, where they don't see the beauty and the wonderfulness of them. It's so tragic and so commonplace that we only see what we want to see in someone else. We cannot, even with each other, I'm afraid, it's true. Especially if we're afraid of an animal, or if there are old myths attached to the animal. An owl is bad luck. A black cat walking your path is bad luck. If you see a rat, well, he's probably got, the plague, or, I mean, on and on and on and on. A skunk, oh, well, he carries rabies. No, no, none of those things are necessarily true. And what I try to say to people when they start talking about that non-human animals are such a problem, I try to gently, and I probably don't do it gently all the time, but I try to say to them, or to encourage them, to look in the mirror. Look in the mirror and ask yourself, what have you as an individual done to make the world a beautiful place? What has your species done to make the world a more beautiful place, or to protect the beauty that we already have? Let's not be pointing the finger and thinking how horrible non-human animals are. We can't even get our own stuff together to be who we should be. These animals are fine and wonderful and just incredible, all on their own. If they never do one single solitary thing that we can understand, that's all right. Because another question I often get is, what good are they? What good is that possum? What does he do for me? Well, nothing maybe. The fact of the matter is that, of course, they're doing all kinds of wonderful things all the time. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that they're here. What matters is that they've always been here. And can we not just say, gosh, that's enough. And I am going to try to be a better person by trying to see his beauty. and try, instead of just seeing him as scary or stupid or ugly or whatever it is that we assign to them that is simply not true.